All right, everyone, leaning a bit into this sort of informal video chat. This is a good way. I may use this more in the future. I think it's a good way for me to get some information out and some videos and content out rather quickly. So, well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich. Today's video, I want to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 things on this list. This is kind of a key number that I've been using lately. I don't know the significance of it yet. But anyway, there's 6 things that I want to caution you against, or things that maybe you ought to think through when using any of these things because of how devastating their effects can be on your game and on your players, okay? These are 6 things that will, most of them, if not all, they all certainly can be used in combat. Many of these are very combat heavy or specific to combat, but there may be some other instances in your game where these things may come up that aren't necessarily within combat or initiative timing. But regardless, these are devastating effects, devastating abilities, things that you want to tread lightly with as a dungeon master. Be careful when you have creatures that have these sort of abilities that can do these sorts of things. Be careful when using these sorts of consequences. Be careful with these things. You know what? I just thought of another. Hold on. If I was to back up, there's actually 7 things. Significance to 7, I don't know, but there's 7 things in this video. 7 effects, consequences, penalizing things to your players that you want to be careful with, and I'll tell you why. So, the first one, stuns and paralyze effects. When we look at those conditions, the incapacitate sorts, right? When a PC is incapacitated, when they are down for the count, if you will, right? And we're not just talking about because you did a bunch of damage and they're now in death save mode, but incapacitate effects, paralyzes, stuns. Number 1, any enemies that attack that person, it's kind of a death spiral, right? They're in such bad shape, they're going to automatically get crit, you're going to have advantage, so on and so forth. But the big reason why you want to be careful, tread lightly, they turn off your players, right? It is terrible. So in my case, I have 8 players, right? We go in initiative order, but even if each player takes a minute to get their turn done, right? From the moment that they decide what they're going to do and actually take that action, move their miniature around on the battlefield and so on, it's 7-8 minutes before that player goes again. If on that player's turn you say you're stunned, you're paralyzed, make a save, oh, you failed, you're done, next. That happens twice. I understand it's a bad consequence. It's part of the game that they have to make a save against it. But if they fail twice in a row, you have to think outside of the game for a moment. That player is sitting at your table for 15 minutes doing nothing. There's a point where you cross the line of penalizing them, punishing them for not investing more into their saving throws, which would have resulted in them succeeding on this save, and just losing the real life player, not the PC, losing the player entirely. If it's 3 rounds and they're sitting there for 30 minutes, I promise you, they're not going to keep cheering on their friends. Hey guys, let's win. I'm okay, but hopefully we can win so you can break me out of this stun or whatever. No, they're just going to check out. So even if they make that save, to wrangle them back into combat is a pain in the ass. So be careful using that too much. It absolutely sucks and is debilitating. And I remember Design 101 from a video game, right? I've talked to some people that I knew were working on Dark Age of Camelot, working on the first Guild Wars. And there were these different effects, right? Even in WoW PvP, they minimize the effects of like a sap, right? Incapacitate sort of effects where it had a really long effect, 45 seconds to a minute against enemies, PvE, creatures in the game, but it was like reduced by 90% against players because it sucks to just have your main healer sit there for a minute and do nothing, right? It's really debilitating. So be careful using those sorts of effects, okay? Next, which can go hand in hand with this first one, intelligence-based saving throws. That is often a dump stat. So be careful. That's why mind flayers can be so devastating. With any, doesn't have to be a monster attack. It can be a trap or something like this, right? Like a puzzle that was created by some archmage that's based around intellect, okay? The reason why you want to be careful with that stuff is it can almost sometimes come across as though you're purposely punishing the fact that intelligence is the main dump stat in 5th edition. And you're preying on the inherent or obvious weakness of all the players. But you're going to just have, quite simply just have players that suck at intelligence-based saves. So it's kind of one of those, hey, I'm going to hand you this situation. Yeah, you already know you're going to fail. You're coming into this role without any confidence. You know what I mean? And that can kind of really break the morale of your player. Notice that a lot of these things affect the player more than the character. And there's oftentimes, it's difficult to weave through as a player, be like, okay, that's kind of fair. It's consistent. It is what it is. I'm not happy with it as a player, but it makes sense because my character should fail at these things. When it starts pushing those buttons of really affecting like the player, where they're just getting fed up and frustrated, you're noticing that you're pulling away from the game and you're affecting the table. So be careful. The third thing you want to be careful of is positioning. And all I simply mean by that is, line of sight breakers or walls or murder holes, or you've got goblins or range combatants up on a hill, but all of your PCs are melee oriented. They don't have a lot of range capability. There's not a lot of spellcasters or rangers. It's, fighters. Yeah, they can throw javelins or something, but they're going to be inferior. Be careful with too much of that because, again, you start poking at their weaknesses so much that it can become almost unfair. It can become grating on your group, okay? The next one, this is a big one. I made a video on this. Be careful playing your creatures as though they have a higher intelligence than they actually have. And a single and best example I can give is really low intelligence. Has nothing to do with CR. Really low intelligence creatures spreading out on the battlefield because the casters in your party have fireball capability. A creature with a CR3 isn't going to know that dude in the robes has the ability to fireball, and the fireball is a 20-foot area. So play them according to intelligence, because that does, sort of like I said in the beginning of the video, it really does create a situation where you're creating this contrast, this dynamism in your combat, where when you do have a group of PCs, or NPCs, I should say, monsters that spread out, right there immediately, the PCs are like, oh, these guys are smart. They know fireball's coming. Sorry, Evocation Wizard, you may not get your best, most efficient fireball on these guys. But we did in the previous fight, and we might in the next fight, because those things are just savage beasts of the jungle. They don't know any better. So be careful with, as a DM, almost metagaming things. Okay? A next one is, this kind of really leans heavily into stun and paralyze effects. Be careful with any sort of turn off or can't use sorts of abilities and effects. Like, you can't use, this creature is afflicted your fighter with some sort of a curse that lay on hands heals don't work. You've just shut off a core component of the paladin. This thing is immune to smites. This thing can't be crit, therefore it can't be snuck attack. That was a punishing thing with 3.0, 3.5, right? Because you're starting to turn off abilities, right? This thing always on a hit immobilizes you. So you're just turning off all of the rogue's advantages of movement with bonus action to dash and so on. This thing, you can't even hide or stealth around it. It just has true sight everywhere. There's no point in even making that roll. If you have a Gloomstalker, and then you have a scout, and then you have an assassin, and then you have a bard that's, wearing boots of elvenkind, right? And like a group of PCs that are just really adept at stealth and sneaking and hiding, and then they're coming into an area where every one of the scouts has true sight, you're just turning off some of their strengths. So be careful of taking that stun and paralyze effect too far into like, they're immune to this. Oh, you happen to be evocation wizards? They're immune to all fire. You know what I mean? That type of stuff. And then the final one, be careful in the traps, but most importantly, the puzzles that you create for your group. Because remember, you know the damn answer. You created the puzzle. You know which buttons they're supposed to push. You know which pillar they're supposed to move on which color stone. You have the answers in front of you. What might seem obvious to you as you're writing it and knowing it is maybe not obvious to your group. And what'll happen is, again, real life time, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes in, if they haven't figured something out, they're almost getting further away from it. They're going to start getting frustrated. So now at that point, what's the value in that puzzle anymore? Keeping them out of the vault? Keeping them out of the key area in the dungeon? Great, but you're losing the table. You're losing pacing. You're messing with the energy and the flow. Even if they open the vault, there's going to be a point of, it's not always going to, Oh, we solved the puzzle an hour and 10 minutes later. Yay, we're excited. Cool, we get the rewards and we're going to get to go further in the dungeon and find the elite monk. No, there may just be some people that are like, that sucked ass. That was an hour and 10 minutes that we're never going to get back. So be careful with that. And one of the best ways to work this in, as your PCs start coming up with solutions, what they think are solutions to your puzzle, even if that's not a solution, add it in. If you have 4 pillars, and each one represents a different season, and you have 4 big stones on the floor, right? 4 tiles on the floor, and they're all 4 different colors. You have one that's white, that's probably the season of winter, right? You have one that's green, maybe that's the season of spring. You have one that's red, season of summer, right? And then autumn, right? Or whatever, okay? What are the 4 colors you have? Now, sounds common sense, right? Pretty easy. Okay, let's move the pillar that represents winter and put it on top of the white stone. Great. But if you have something in your notes that says, this is a room of opposites, read the tapestries and it tells you everything is screaming opposite, opposite, opposite. And the winter stone of white is supposed to go on the summer platform. If your PCs miss some of those clues that indicate opposites, they're going to be beating their head against the wall for 30 minutes. So all of a sudden, if a PC, 30 minutes in, or a player is like, it has to be this. That's a Viking statue. It's winter. It has to go on the white. You know what is now a part of the solution? The winter stone going on the white. Even though your notes say it's opposites, that is now a solution. Allow your players, just through effort, to figure out and solve your puzzles and your traps. Unless you just want that stopgap where, cool, you don't open the door, you don't go further in the dungeon. I guess it's time to leave. Let's look at some more notes because everything at the bottom of the dungeon did not work. We're not going to use that today because you couldn't get through the damn door. So be careful with understanding and the power that you have and the fact that you know all the secrets and expecting your players to figure all that shit out in combat, tactically, whatever. Be careful with not being in the moment at the table. Be very, very careful with that stuff. So there it is. Just chiming in random. That's all I have. See you guys.